Welcome everyone to another episode of Act in Perspective podcast. I'm your host, Hugh Simonik. Today we're talking to Dr. Matthew Vilot. Matt is trained as a clinical psychologist and is now an assistant professor at Bastyr University in Seattle, Washington. He is the author of numerous books and chapters on mindfulness, acceptance, experiential therapies, and contextual behavioral science, including Mastering the Clinical Conversation, Language as Intervention, co-authored by Jennifer Vilot and Steve Hayes. As a peer-reviewed trainer in acceptance commitment therapy, recognized by the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science, he has facilitated over 100 clinical trainings in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South America, and Europe. Over the past few years, he has also run dozens of online trainings gathering participants from all continents. Today, we'll be discussing the details of his book, Mastering the Clinical Conversation, which provides psychotherapists with evidence-based strategies for harnessing the power of language to free clients from life-constraining patterns and promote psychological flexibility. Techniques are demonstrated for activating and shaping behavior change, building a flexible sense of self, fostering meaning and motivation, creating powerful experiential metaphors, and strengthening the therapeutic relationship. Please help welcome Dr. Matthew Vilot. Yeah. Talking about language, how old are we as language? What are we talking about here? And what are the cognitive biases and distortions that are built in?
Yeah. How old? I'm gonna say. I hope I'm not wrong. I know we wrote that in the book, but Steve Hayes is the expert in these kind of things. I think is it 10,000 years? Seems not very much. Yeah. It's got to be more than that. I honestly, I don't remember exactly, but I know it's very, very short in comparison even to the existence of humanity, and let alone of animal. So yet it is strange, because when you think of how much space it takes in our lives, in our mind, really, it's like constantly thinking, constantly. Well, maybe more than the average. I don't know. I'm definitely very talkative in my mind and with people, especially when I get interested. So it is really a sea of often of words, but more than words, it's a sea of symbol. And when we start to look at language from the perspective of RFT or other theories that approach language really through basically a relational activity that builds symbols, then you start to understand that language is everywhere. It's not just words. It's about meaning. Like for example, like we're on Zoom, there's a black as a sort of frame around our pictures, and so thinking of all the things that black evokes to me. Like everybody can do that. What does black mean to you? And because if you spend some time reflecting in yourself and all the things that you can remember that link to black, you will keep going, expanding. So it's a really, really pervasive activity, something that we do, and that we do often without realizing that we're doing it. A bit like breathing. But the difference with breathing is that I was going to say that we have to learn to language, although we have to learn to breathe too, I suppose, but it's a little less sophisticated. So the second question was about biases, or what can you say?
Yeah, the cognitive biases and distortions that are built into language, built into our brains, that we have to be aware of.
Yeah, I think every bias, every distortion, every flaw, struggle is just one side of a coin, and the other side is what we would call a quality, a strength, a power, or everything. It's like in those superhero stories where is almost all superhero stories have and I'm not a big fan of those, but we all know something. You have to learn to use your superpower, and if there's often like, if you don't learn to master it, you're gonna hurt people, you're gonna hurt yourself, you're gonna suffer, you're not going to actualize your full potential. and so it's something that you have in you, and but you have to learn. There's often also stories like that of being ashamed of what you're doing, or that you're different. And I'm not sure that many authors of comic books are aware of it, but I think there's probably a metaphor for language pretty much every time, or other things like that. It's that, for example, what I described earlier, our capacity to reflect and to make connection through symbol. Like I look at black and like, what does that mean? What does that remind me of? And well, you could look at two paths, one in which it's going to make me feel miserable and ruin my day, where maybe I start thinking of all negative things that have happened in my life related to that color. And maybe so an easy one would be mourning. Black is often associated with funerals, death, and in some way that could connect me to a path where actually it would be meaningful. Like I could remember the loss of parents, but I'm sad, but it's meaningful, and that reconnects me to them. So it's not necessarily going to be bad for me. But if instead I start to get into a loop of everybody is going to die, and what's the point anyways, I'm going to die too, what am I doing here talking about you see that it's not completely different. It's not like on one hand you're doing something I mean the two paths are not fundamentally different. It's more like in the service of what and how it's expanding, how it connects. Mostly when it goes wrong, I would say it's when it tends to go toward a form of fragmentation of your it's a universe, your experience, your conceptualization of the world and yourself. So when I start thinking of well, what's the point? We're all gonna die anyways. In a way, it covers everything, but it's missing something. It's like, well, but I do care, yeah. But there's a lot of things that I'm looking forward to today, and so as you see, there is a denial of things. So it's a reflection. There is an expansion, but it's something is missing there. Whereas on the other path, I'm thinking of someone I lost, and I'm sad, and maybe at that point I'm on the verge of maybe I could start being depressed, but now it becomes meaningful because I think of this person and maybe something that they told me in the past, and that still resonates now, and I allow myself to feel sad now, and I'm noticing that this person, even though she's dead a long time ago, she's still with me now. So you see the different dynamic here. Now that person who's died long time ago, thanks to symbols, language, that capacity I have to have making connections, is now still alive with me, still talking to me. And that's the exact opposite conclusion of the other one, is that we're never going to die. On one hand, it's, what's the point, we're going to die? And the other end, it's wow, she's still alive with me in a way, and how beautiful, and everything, nothing is ever going to die, Did you see? And yet it's often it's really a very thin line between going one way or the other, but it's never too late to reconnect. That's the good good news.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah. Tell me about how RFT is grounded in contextual behavioral science and functional contextualism.
How RFT is? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
How RFT is grounded within contextual behavioral science and functional contextualism.
Yeah, so functional contextualism really is the philosophy of science that's the foundation. Like in any science, the philosophy is really the first ground and the most important one, the one that you cannot allow yourself to get wrong and to forget. Often think of the foundations of a house, or I think it's even more than that, because you really see the philosophy through contextual behavioral science, RFT, their applications in terms of acceptance and commitment therapy, or anything else. So at the core of functional contextualism, it's really it's a sort of evolution of American pragmatism with anchoring in experience, developing ideas based on how they are useful, and with the sense really that's something that's often missed. I find nowadays when we refer to pragmatism is that it's a very holistic philosophy. It's not just like what works to fix a problem. That if we do that, it gets very narrow and limited, and it can lead us toward a little too mechanistic view, especially if we think of psychology. It's a very holistic approach. Like what works, whole things considered. How does that fit? So it's really a sense of working more in the sense of how it functions, how is it part of a whole. So functional contextualism, in a way, you could almost say that it's the same thing as pragmatism, but it was developed as a way of reorienting behaviorism more in that direction. And then contextual behavioral science is, okay, well, once you think that way, once you think from that perspective, what can you do with it? What can you research? And then it can lead to applications. RFT is a branch of contextual behavioral science. It's the branch that studies language and cognition, basically. You could almost say really that contextual behavioral science is behavioral psychology, and that RFT is behavioral psychology studying language.
Okay, all right. And what is relational framing? What do we talk about here in terms of the basic relational frames?
Yeah, so a relational frame is a sort of basic unit of language that RFT has identified, or it's conceptualized. And really at the core, it's like, how do we build symbolic relationships among things, among people, among events? So if I take this cup and I say, this is a cup, okay, we will call that a frame of coordination. It's what we learn first. We learn to name stuff, names. Kids learn to name their toys, their environments, themselves. So we name, and so a frame is when, or the behavior of framing means that we put together two stimuli, if we want to use the behavioral terms, to things, and then it's how do they come together? So they come together. It's coordination, but they can also not come together. So it's a cup, but it's not a bear. Okay, so it's not a bear. So if I have a teddy bear and I have that, I can say that they don't go together. But at some level, they might also come together. For example, they are both mine. So then it's like, okay, they are coordinated because they belong to me. Well, that would be a frame of hierarchy, or it could be of inclusion. Or it's like I have these two things. So in some ways, they are different, but they are also the same because they are both things that belong to me. And so when we learn language, we learn there's a series of basic frames. We could imagine a very, very long list, perhaps an infinite number of subframes, but the basic ones, probably coordination, distinction, comparison, condition. So it's when we learn the sort of if-then reasoning, causal reasoning, and you understand that if I push the cup the table, is gonna fall and break. So that's like, oh yeah, so when I do that, it's often what happens when kids develop intentionality, around 3 months, when they start to grab things and see that they can move objects. So they're not yet developing the frame of condition, but we could say it's the precursor of it. Like if I keep talking with my friends and don't watch the time, I'm gonna be late at work. So in this sentence, there's a lot of frames, like conditional, hierarchy, and so on. And so this behavior is something that we learn to do socially. We are taught to speak by usually our parents and social community. Then we start to do it by yourself. We can do it without speaking. So it's funny, my daughter the other day, she had this little insight. She's 4. She has this little insight that kids have when you start to realize certain things. She told me, it was in French, but I'm going to try to say it in English. She said, hey, Dad, you know what? We were in the car, and you know what? I can speak without saying anything. and I guessed what she was talking about, and she said, "Oh, you mean like you can think in your head, and that we cannot hear what you're saying?" I said, "Yeah," and it's fun. I said, "Yeah, it's fun." So it's like the discovery of superpower, right? It's like she realized that was not the first time she could do it, but she had that added frame, I could say, of hierarchy, or perspective taking. It's a really big one. So, oh, I realize that I'm doing that, and oh, I realize what it means, and I can share it with somebody else who understands what I mean, even though he cannot hear me. And so it's for her, it's like, oh, I can speak and I cannot be heard. It would be like I can be invisible, right? So anyways, look, answer to your question, but in a way, I like to show the big picture when I answer these kind of questions, because I think RFT, you can easily miss how you can easily miss its potential. You can think, okay, well, it's about coordination. It's a teddy bear. It can very quickly get boring. It's like, yeah, well, whatever. But the potential is really huge. Once you get that, it's really amazing. Really, just like you see a kid starting to develop language, and you could look at it as, okay, yeah, whatever, a teddy bear, but at the same time you could look at, wow, it's really incredible what they're going to be able to do. And again, you have to learn to master it, because it can certainly be a source of suffering.
Yeah, it can. Can you talk a little bit more about that it can be helpful and it can be hurtful as well? How can it be both?
Yeah, well, it's so I can introduce a concept that's really important in RFT here. The concept of transformation of stimulus function. And I can say it in a simpler way. It's how language transforms the way we relate to things, we perceive things, we react to things, how they impact us. In my example earlier, color black, in and of itself, you could say, okay, it's just a perception. You could say it doesn't mean anything in and of itself. But through my history with that color, the social community, all this symbolism, it can then have a differential impact. It's like, okay, if I start, like I said earlier, if I start to approach it from the perspective of what it reminds me of, that's meaningful, then it's going to, through language, impact me in a, could say, positive way. And by positive, I mean meaningful. I'm going to feel connected with myself. I'm going to grow and feel in harmony with myself. So that would be the positive way that language can help us. It's some people talk about, there's a lot of, I noticed, of debates about the concept of reality these days. It's not new, but it gets a lot of attention, and it makes sense, because there's been a lot of questionings around social media and virtual reality and multiverse and things like that, where we're like, or fake news, what's real, what's true, and look at how we can change reality with our Instagram filters, and we don't know anymore what's real, what not real. It's really interesting, because it gets to really question where are we supposed to find reality. Is that out of what we think? Some people think like that. They're like, oh yes, our thoughts are not real. Reality is what we can touch. That's not how I see things, because for me, thinking is everywhere. It's I touch the table, but there's still thinking in there. So it's like, it's language. You can look at it as, I guess, the Instagram filter. Imagine that you have a lot of filters, and you can choose how you want to look at things, how they connect. What kind of picture would you like to see? Do you like a vintage? Do you like to do you want to do an artistic picture? What's the purpose of it? And on the other hand, it's the same mechanism, but it can go wrong. It's like, what would be a bad picture? There's no bad picture per se. It's if you would like to see use a vintage picture, but it ends up being a very flashy one. You're not going to be happy because that's not what you want. Basically, there is a mismatch between how you want things to be and how you see them. If you can change the filter, that's great. If you can't, then you might get frustrated. So I guess language is all about, from perspective of our book, it's about how do you learn to expand the range of filters that you have, use them, and it doesn't work like filters in a way. It's a metaphor. It works to some extent, but what you have to learn also is that you cannot just press a button. You have to learn to. It's a very you have to let go of control in many ways, paradoxically, to be able to master it.
Yeah. Can you talk about the role of the central role of perspective taking and what that means? What do we look for?
Yeah, perspective taking. So it's again a term that is very common in everyday language. If you look in psychotherapy, it's something that all psychotherapists do. Almost all models of psychotherapy have explicitly in their techniques the use of perspective taking. So the term in and of itself is not specifically RFT, but RFT has a particular take on it and considers that it's a type of framing. As I was saying earlier, there's different types of framing, and perspective taking being one of them, but a particularly complex one that we learn later. So I was saying earlier that kids tend to learn first coordination, distinction, and progressively comparison. Perspective taking start to develop around 3, the precursors even before, but it really gets more elaborated around 4 or 5 when you become able to, well, a bit like my daughter, the example, like I can take perspective on myself. She was aware that I didn't know what she knew. So she knew that I had a perspective that was different than hers. She knew that she could communicate it. And then, so that's a really complex series of operations there. And so perspective taking, then we use it to, to relate to the world, to relate to other people, to ourselves, through time, through space. It is important in therapy because, at the core of psychotherapy, really, we teach people, or we help them develop more self-awareness. It's good say that all psychotherapy approaches are about helping people develop self-awareness. So that means that we're talking about perspective taking, helping people develop perspective on themselves, and perspective that's going to be as integrated as possible. Because we in each moment we look at different directions, we reflect on different stuff in our lives, we're talking to another person. So you can think of it as like constantly new perspective, like in a way as if I was taking pictures. And at the same time as I'm doing that, I want to be able to create connections so that I'm not fragmented. As I was saying earlier, when it goes wrong, it's that we go through a toward fragmentation. For example, if there's a thought that pops in my mind right now, like I forgot to tell my brother something, that's, you could say it's a sort of perspective that's popping up. Me, my brother, something, and it's not related to what's happening right now. So I have 2 perspectives, and I'm simplifying it because it could be more perspectives. But like if we isolate just these 2 perspectives, now I have these 2 perspectives. It's one is here now with you. Another one is, we could say now, there then, future, past. And that's where you can start to feel anxious, right? It's like an analogy could be like like a building that is going to be tested for earthquake. It's like it's straight, and then things start to move. So it's supposed to be here, but there also, there, here, there. If it's too rigid, it's going to break. Right, we've ever seen those incredible movies when you see buildings, they can really bend. It's like when you look at that, you're like, my God, it's going to fall apart. No, actually, it's the opposite. It needs to be able to do that. So when that perspective, I forgot to say something to my brother, pops up, I need to be able to go there but stay here at the same time, right? To be able to do that. I could say, well, I need to be able to let go, not think of that. The problem is that that's the building being too rigid. That's fine as long as it's just a small thought, not too important. Oh yeah, that's okay. But if it's an important one, if it's something that's beyond my mind, I'm not gonna be able to do that. So I'm gonna try to really focus on you here now. Let's not think of that. And in the end, I'm still going to break because it's still too attractive there. So if instead I'm able to, like, for example, I made up the example, but imagine that it was really something that had popped in my mind. It would have been pretty smart of me to bring it up as an example, because that way I can be present with it and it can be present to you and it's not interfering because it's actually an example now. So that's a way of creating connection, inclusion of a perspective that should not be here in some ways, but now is allowed to be here. So that's when we talk about perspective taking therapy, we have to talk about at the same time this integration framing or hierarchical framing is how we are going to make the connections so that those pictures are not completely random and fragmented, but we could say, if we follow the metaphor, in a way we are also building a movie with a great story.
Yeah. Can you give an example, just another example of how you teach someone, new client, perspective taking? Are there basic methods that you can use?
So it depends on what clients, patient we're talking about, what kind of issues. Most adults, adolescents are able to take perspectives. They have the frames in their repertoire. It's not an issue. If I ask people to project themselves 10 years from now, or to take the perspective of another person, they can do it. There are people, and it's what I studied in schizophrenia, for example, or in autism, who really struggle even at that stage. So even being able to take the perspective of another person, it's hard. Like, a lot of adults who can do it, they might struggle in certain contexts. For example, an adult could do it very well with say a good friend. Can you take the perspective of your friend? Imagine what you would think if you said the same thing. But then if it's in couple therapy and the same person is asked to do that with a partner in the middle of a conflict, maybe they're not able to do it. Can you put yourself in the shoes of your wife when she said that? And the client is like, no, I don't want to, or no, I can't. In that particular context, they can do it, or they have a hard time doing it, because what they would contact there, if you took that perspective, would be maybe too painful, too threatening. Right? Having empathy toward other people means opening ourselves to another reality, another world. And do we want that to be part of our world? Maybe not. So going back to my building and earthquake metaphor, it's like, no, I resist, I don't want to go there. So teaching perspective taking can be, if it's someone, we're talking about someone who has not developed those skills well for various reasons, you can follow protocols that are pretty systematic in teaching the ability. The same way as you, I'm gonna say the same way you teach kids to speak and to take perspective, but it's not exactly true, because kids, normally developing children, they learn just through normal interactions of every day. They, say, hey, how are you doing? What did you do today? That's training in perspective taking. Hey, be careful, your brother is gonna fall. He's not as old as you. You need to be careful. Those kind of things are just, it's systematic in a way, but it's not organized to train. When people have not developed well these skills, there are programs in behavior and applied behavior analysis, and there's a whole training in RFT to do that. We can teach specifically the frames that have not been developed well, are not well developed in the repertoire. But if we're talking about adults who have that in their repertoire, but they struggle to apply those skills in certain contexts, then what we can do is, we can train in that domain. We can repeat the exercise. So, for example, if I have a client who has struggled with depression. Often people, when you're depressed, even if it's just for a few days, it's hard to project yourself in the future. Often it's like there's nothing to look forward to. There's no perspective. Or when you start thinking of it, it's very bleak. So it's a sort of a very broad picture of it's all it's going to be boring. It's all going to be the same. Or okay, but that's you could look at it as a lack of training or the loss of habit in going there. Actually, like broadly speaking, I could say, we're not gonna die anyways. It's one perspective that's very, very broad, very, very um, simplified of the complexity of what it's going to be. yeah, in some ways that's right, we are going to die, but can we look a little more in more details of what's gonna be like? There's a lot of things that might happen before that, and even what does that mean even to that we all die. And so then we could go there. What I would do with the client is, for example, say so let's take 1 year from now. Where do you imagine you might be? So at first, maybe the client might be reluctant to go there because depressed. I don't know. So we take our time. So do you think you'll still be in the same city, for example, okay? What do you picture at that time? How old will you be? And maybe I'll do it 10 years from now. So, and as we do that, and it's really just an example that the client might start to be in touch with things that he was not thinking of. Like, for example, maybe the client will start thinking that 10 years from now, his kid will be 15. And then suddenly pops up in his mind, oh, I love a 15-year-old. And, that reminds him, actually, that gets him to take a perspective in the past when he was 15 and what he would do, what he used to do with his dad, they would play soccer together, and then suddenly he has this picture of him doing that with his kid, and now it's like there is something to look forward to. Of course, I'm simplifying it. I'm not trying to say that I ask a question and suddenly everything is great, but that's the idea, is that by actually engaging in perspective taking, and we start to connect with things that there in the future. And then now he cannot help himself. He's actually looking forward to something. It's like you're on a bike, and if you don't look forward, at some point you're gonna lose your balance. It happens when kids learn to ride their bike. They often they're tempted to look at their feet because it's a bit scary. And I have to tell my daughter, she's learning now. I say, look forward, look forward, because to be able to keep your balance, you have to. It's a magical thing almost. Just by looking forward, you know how to find your balance. So perspective taking in this case would be like teaching the clients to look forward again, not necessarily to guess the future or and it's definitely not about problem solving, like, okay, what do you need to do so that this future will happen? To me, it starts with just look, let's explore in that direction. And so in this example, there's the future, but it could be the past. It could be like, it's done a lot in trauma therapy, for example, a lot of exploration of the past, obviously, and integration of the past in the present, or vice versa. It could be in family therapy, perspective taking of different members of a family, and people learning to take each other's perspective and learning to integrate all those perspectives and so on.
Yeah. When you talk about transforming that stimulus function, for a depressed person or a person who has a traumatized past, it almost sounds like you're through the examples that you provide in the book, that you're prompting that person to provide insights for themselves, that they're almost, well, going 15 years in the future or 15 years in the past, that they provide some insights, they get connections. And can you talk a little bit more about that, and also that you're adding relational frames, not subtracting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, you could summarize the process that we described in the book, and I would say, I think it's the process of all psychotherapies in the end. Not to say that the way our therapy is the best and we explain everything, is that it's not even. I would say that RFT helps understand the core processes of language, obviously, and since language is at the core of all psychotherapies, when you understand RFT, I think you can sort of understand, look at all psychotherapies in a very universal way. And so the core process, I would say, is the integration of perspectives, as I said. I could say it in different ways. Holistic integration, I like to use this term. In ACT, the concept of self as context describes quite well also the same thing. It's like, how can we bring together all our experiences in a way that feels right, and also that doesn't rigidify the process. It's like it's constantly changing, constantly reflecting, having new experiences, and how do I include these new experiences in a way that's going to fit with the whole. I was saying earlier, talking about pragmatism, functional contextualism, it's the same idea, really. I'm trying to remember your question. You said, can you repeat the second part of the question?
Oh, yeah. Let me see if I can remember straight. It almost seems like you're.
I mean, you cannot add. You got adding a not
you can't add or
yeah. Right. Yeah. So it's actually this idea, you can link it to the core concepts of functional contextualism, behaviorism, and actually it's this concept that you will find also in physics. It's like nothing is created out of nothing. It's always transformation. You know, it's a famous, at least in France, physicist Lavoisier in the 18th century came up with this saying. In French, we know that saying very well. It maybe exists in other languages, but nothing is lost, nothing is created, everything is transformed, something like that. It's one of those laws of physics where you're like, and that's a really important one, because once you understand that, you realize that we live in a whole, and that we cannot take something up, because then where would we put it? It would have to go in another world, but then that other world, where would that be? That means that other world would exist too. Well, then that means that there is a world that is a world plus another world. So we just made our world bigger. And so basically it's like, okay, I can never create something out of nothing, make anything disappear. And it's a, depending on how you, if you have thought of that and how long you've been thinking of these kind of things, it can be more or less easy to comprehend. But I think it never ceases to be really puzzling, because we certainly have the experience that things disappear, people die, they are not there anymore. So there's got to be a way that things can be suppressed, disappear. Yeah, but they disappear completely? Well, no. I mean, they get transformed. If you look at it just from a really chemical perspective, well, no, it doesn't completely disappear. It gets transformed. And so we think the same way with language, with thinking. That that's a concept that is from behaviorism in general. It's like, when you learn, you don't unlearn. Sure, I could forget something, but it's not the same thing as deleting. If we think of the psychology as a machine, then we think we can delete stuff, but it doesn't work like that. It's transformation. I don't want to get into too much. Don't want to be too complex here, because it would be difficult to make it intelligible in a short time. But basically, the idea is that we're going to work only through addition. Anything that happens is something that's going to need to find space in our universe. So something bad happens to me, I wish it didn't happen. Sure, that's fine to wish that it didn't happen. But if I start engaging in my mind, in my behaviors, and trying to literally remove it from my history, I'm gonna get into trouble, because that's not going to work. And in fact, I'm only going to grow my memory of it. The more I'm gonna try to forget it, or to compartmentalize it, the more I'm going to create fragmentation. It's going to be a denial of myself in the end, because it's like, well, I did live that experience. So in therapy, I work on trauma. I think at the core, and there's of course different ways of doing it, but at the core, you could say that it's a way of learning to integrate parts of the self that have been fragmented due to well, it can be partly adaptive, and compartmentalizing, dissociating can be adaptive to some extent. It's something is so painful that you create a sort of wall so that you're not too impacted by it. But in therapy, you can learn to have more fluidity among your experiences without being completely overwhelmed by it. But at the same time, you don't have to live separate lives. One that was traumatized, one that is yourself of today. Because if you separate like that, then it's very hard, for example, to access memories from the time when you were traumatized. Like a lot of people will have a hard time remembering good memories from their childhood, because during their childhood they were also abused. But as a result, so they never think of their childhood, for example. It's sort of dissociated, but then as a result, they also lose all the good things that happened there, the meaning, the purpose, maybe also life experiences that could teach them something about today. It's actually pretty common for people who go through trauma therapy to realize to be more in touch with their power, even at the time of the trauma. For example, realizing what they did to protect themselves, including to dissociate, including to sometimes do things that they interpreted as being a victim or contributing to the trauma. And now they realize through this new perspective that from the perspective of being a child at that time, they actually protected themselves. They were in total survival mode, and that they can look at what they did as an act of heroism. And so that's the integration part. Right. That's not the same thing as doing exposure with the idea that we are going to decrease the emotion and that we're not going to think about it anymore. Right. No, that would be exposure, but exposure where you're going to be in touch with yourself fully, where it's like you put two things together that seem that they should not be together, and then you're going to keep them together in a context of compassion, love, and patience, until they find a way to come together. It's a yin-yang idea there, it's like an integration. In dialectical behavior therapy, you find the same concept too. It's like, how can you integrate things that don't seem to come together, and when it works, then you get that sense of really that thing, like sort of two sides of the same coin. It's like, but you don't want to get rid of any side, because both are part of your life and made you who you are.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's a great leeway into the RFT perspective of the self. And you talk about selfing in the book. What is selfing in the flexible self as compared to the conceptualized self?
So
how does the self originate too?
Yeah, so the self is linked in RFT to this concept of perspective taking I was saying earlier. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, when you're born, you're fused completely with the world. You have needs, but if you are in good environments, they are met sort of naturally. You cry, you're fed. You cry, you're taken care of. You're tired, you sleep. It's a sort of very automatic relationship with the world. But as time goes by, you start to find that, get in touch with that more complexity, and this thing that things don't happen right in time, or that you start to feel yourself more. As I was saying earlier, you start to be able to touch objects, and you realize that you touch an object, the object moves, but then there are other people. So it gets more complex. And what emerges over time through this sense of hierarchy I was saying earlier is that there's a sense of perspective, my own perspective, my sense of self is unique. Is that it's the integration of all the things that I'm seeing. It's like the example I was saying earlier about my daughter. Like, she gets in touch with that. There are certain experiences that she has that other people cannot see. So metaphorically, you could say it's a sort of place from which you can connect with everything, but it's only your perspective, and it will never be the perspective of another person. So your self really can be almost equated to a sense of reality, like how do you bring together all your experiences. So self-concept is say, inside this broad perspective, you can look at subcategories of selves. So at the highest level, I could say, okay, I have a sense of self, me. It's been me all along. Memories of myself as a kid, imagine myself in the future. I know I could say it's the name, but it goes beyond that. It's really something that's felt. I know it. It's me. Okay. But then inside that, I can say, okay, there's me as a father. There's me as a teacher. There's me as a kid. And you could say that all those, we could say, identities, roles, they are concept of myself that are sort of subgroups of experiences. Like me, child. Okay, that is going to encompass memories, pictures, IDs, things like that. Then me, teacher, same thing, responsibilities, behaviors, and things like that. And it can overlap to some extent. For example, when I act in class with, like sometimes some humor, or I'm being silly, maybe I'm reconnecting a bit with myself as a child, or I give an example from my childhood. So there can be some overlaps like that. And from the perspective of what we talk about in our book, but that's something that you're going to find in acceptance and commitment therapy. And honestly, in many ways, you'll find it in, if not in all, in many psychotherapy approaches. The idea that we want to help clients develop a sense of self that can integrate all their senses of self. Mm-hmm. That we want to be able to, and that's true for everybody, we want to be able to have variety, flexibility in our lives, being able to engage in a variety of actions, experience lives in all its ways that possible. But at the same time, we want to have a sense of unity, a sense that we're whole, that part of it is efficiency, because if I'm completely a different person when I'm a teacher, or when I'm a parent, for example, then I have a sense that nothing should communicate there. So I come back from work, and then I have to completely leave behind my work. It's like, okay, that's over here, and I'm focused on my children, and then vice versa. Okay, don't think of my children. It's like the example I was saying earlier. If something that pops in my mind, I forgot to say something to my brother. Okay, yeah. Anyways, I want to focus in this area. But if I don't have a sense of self that's broader than that, I'm going to go one concept, and then another concept, and another concept, and I don't have a sense of unity and wholeness. And what could happen is that for example, I could make choices in my life that, all things considered, are not compatible. Like when I'm at work, I work and I give everything, and then I'm at home and I don't have any energy anymore, because I worked, I work as if that was the only thing I live in my life. And then I am at home, and if I do the same thing, so I'm going to get burnout. That's just an example. And then there's other parts of myself that never get any attention. Or another example could be, like we were saying with trauma, for example. It's like there are parts of my life past that are conceptualized as was by childhood, abuse, terrible years. And that might be true in many ways, but by being conceptualized like that and limited only to that, all the good things that might have happened during that time, even for someone who lived through really, really terrible lives during their childhood, even if they might never call any of their experiences there happy, there might be meaningful things that happen there, even in the pain. So by having that concept of terrible, never think of it, it's really like severing a limb in a way, and sometimes you have to do it if it's necessary, but that's precisely to be whole. It doesn't work like that with trauma. You want to be able to develop a sense of self that's going to integrate everything.
Right, yeah. Talk about how rules are an extension of relational framing and the sensitivity of those rules.
Yeah, so a rule in RFT refers to different things. It could be a belief, it could be literally a rule, it could be an instruction. But I think in everyday language, the best term would probably be beliefs. Yeah. So it's, for example, I think that to be able to be accepted by others, I need to be nice, agreeable. I need to be able to make good conversations, even if I don't feel like it. So that you could say that it's a rule. Usually, it's so the relationship with frames is that I just said a sentence, right? That's a sentence. So words inside of that, you can look at many frames, but one that's really particularly important there, it's a conditional framing or causal framing. In order to be accepted, I have to be agreeable, to be nice, and so on. So there is an if-then here, right? So that organizes my behavior, because I know now if I have this rule, if I follow this rule, it means when I'm going to be among people that I want to be accepted by, for some reason, it's very important. We kind of always want to be accepted by everybody in some ways, but there are contexts in which it's more important. For example, at work, family, things like that. Then it's you can think of it almost as a program, in the software. So in fact, I think they might even call them rules. Not sure, or functions. Like, okay, one thing that needs to happen in that context is need to be agreeable. So that rule, where does it come from? A belief. Well, it could be something that I've heard when I was a kid. It was culturally taught, or in my family, or maybe I learned it from watching other people. Maybe I came up with that conclusion in some ways, but now it's a rule that over time might have regained some strength. And the more you apply it, and it seems to be true, the more it gets strength. So, and it can broaden in terms of context also. So perhaps at the beginning it was I need to be nice with my friends at school if I want them to accept me, but then it became that true also at work. It became true with a girlfriend. It became true when I play sport with people, in politics, and then it's just more and more and more and more and more. So it spreads. So a rule, it's a sort of a principle of functioning. And the issue with sensitivity to context is that the rules are helpful if they help you adapt to the context, respond to the context in a way that works well. We were talking about pragmatism earlier. How does it going to work? Like, is it a good idea to be nice with people? Yeah, I mean, yes, many ways, in a lot of contexts. If you want to start on good ground, if you want to make friends, yeah. But there are contexts. First of all, what does that mean? Nice, because there's lots of ways of being nice. Sometimes you're nice with someone by telling them something that's hard to hear. It would be easier for you to not give them feedback, but you're going to tell them some feedback so that you can help them. So already that challenges a little bit the rule. And there are lots of things to consider too. Like, do you want to be accepted by people for who you are, or do you want to fabricate an image of you, be a fake person so that you'll be superficially accepted? If you're nice, if you're trying to be nice, but you you're not feeling like it right now, you're not in a good mood, are you going to force yourself to smile and to agree? Or if you disagree with something, like you're at work and there are decisions to be made, and you say, no, I don't want to disagree with people because then they're not going to accept me. But they're not accepting you. They're actually not even seeing you because you're not showing yourself. So that rule becomes insensitive to your experience. It becomes, oh yeah, to be accepted by others, you need to be nice, but you're not going to be accepted. You're being nice, but you're not accepted because you're not really there. You're not acting yourself. So the rules to be helpful needs to be, just like I was saying again with my earthquake building metaphor, is that they need to have the flexibility so that they can adapt to what happens, to changes in the context. There is a form, the building is straight, okay? But when things change, they need to be able to bend enough to adjust to what happens. So I'm nice, I'm a nice person, I'm agreeable, but if a person's knocking at my door and says, hey, can I come in because I want to check your apartment? I'm gonna check first, and I'm gonna say, wait, who are you? I'm gonna say, yes, please come in. I need to be able to interpret the rule with enough flexibility so that it's gonna work, all things considered in context.
Right. And a major theme in your book is a work toward functional coherence. Can you talk a little bit more about functional coherence, what that is and why it's important?
Functional coherence is the term that we came up with that captures the concept that I've been talking about throughout really this interview here. Is that coherence is how things come together. It's like how do they coordinate? How they fit together? It's integration. We know that things cohere when they are in the right place and it's harmonious. And if something is off, doesn't work, it's like you're maybe repairing your some wires and stuff. It's like, oh, what is that wire? It doesn't fit here. That should not be here. Oh yeah, it's not right. And then you plug it in the right place and say, oh yeah, now it works. So it flows now. Like, okay, now the electricity is there, the light is there. So that's the idea with coherence. And so functional refers to that idea of again of pragmatism and holistic pragmatism. It's like, in order to be coherent, it needs to work, all things considered. So because it's important to call it functional, because we can find coherence at local levels. You could say, for example, that being nice with to be accepted is coherent. As long as you leave aside situations in which being nice is going to cause you trouble, as long as you forget about being authentic, then it's going to work. So we'd say it's not functional because its practicality is limited, but it's coherent to some extent. So functional coherence is a way of saying it's radical coherence. You could say it's like everything needs to be harmonious. It's always moving toward complete harmony. And you know what's interesting is that it matches really well the concept of spirituality approach by psychology. It's like an integration of our relationship to the self, to other, and to the universe or God. Or so it's a way of saying everything needs to fit together. And by need, I mean that's the process. That's what you have to work on constantly, or have. That's what you're doing. That's what we're doing. Whether we want it or not, that we're always trying to find harmony with everything. So functional coherence is a way of capturing a process that I think is natural, that we all do. We tend to go in that direction. But then it becomes in our book one of the processes or a facet of the main process that we try to develop with our clients, always helping them integrate everything, especially things that they tend to reject, things that seem to be contradictory, or we always with the sense of how is it going to come in harmony with the whole.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about a powerful tool of metaphor and the central role of metaphor, and how do you pick good ones, powerful ones?
Yeah, and metaphors are interesting ways of using language, because it's a very experiential way of using language. We were saying earlier that language is about building symbolic relationships. So can be a sense of detachment from the concrete reality. Mm-hmm. Like saying earlier, like color black, we can see black, but then the meaning of it, funerals, mournings, things like that, it's like tuxedo, things like that. It's not something that we can see right now. It's not a direct perception, although I can see it. You cannot see what I see. It's an abstract perception. But metaphors are interesting because it's symbolic. Like, for example, a metaphor that's often used in ACT is to compare struggling in anxiety with struggling in the quicksand. So as a way of teaching that if you try to avoid anxiety, you're going to sink in your anxiety even more, just like if you try to escape quicksand by being very agitated and panicking, you're going to sink even more. So there's a parallel between two situations. When you use this metaphor, you're not literally in the quicksand. Maybe you're even talking to someone who's never been in it, but you're bringing concrete features, more tangible features of your experience to a situation, anxiety, that is not, completely understood, that you're struggling to approach from a more pragmatic perspective. So what's useful in metaphors is that it helps connect clients with an experience that they either know better, more concretely, more directly, or that they can relate to, even if they've never experienced it before, but that there is a sense that you're more directly connected with the concrete features of the situation. It's less abstract. You know, when you try to resolve a problem and it's abstract, you're often going to be like, wait, I need to be more concrete. Can we like draw a visual, or can you give me a concrete example? That's what we do in conversation. When we get to, I've been doing it all along, you know, giving examples, comparisons, metaphors. Why? Because that's how I'm going to be understood. I know that I need to anchor the concepts of RFT into concrete examples, metaphors, so that it's possible for you to understand, to relate to it. Then the more you know RFT, the less you need those concrete examples, because the abstract concepts now have concrete features for you. You said transformation of stimulus function, and for me, I don't hear it as jargon. I think there's many concrete features that can appear. So that it's the same idea in therapy. If the client says, for example, as earlier I was giving the example of depression and difficulty of projecting oneself in the future, client might say that. It might literally say, I can't project myself in the future. It feels like my life has stopped since I retired, and I cannot see beyond that. I'm already seeing a metaphor in what the client is saying here. Like, I cannot see beyond. And so you were saying how to choose a good metaphor. Well, what I like to do actually now is more to co-develop metaphors with the client. So, and often it starts from what they say, and I invite them to elaborate more toward the metaphor. So I might say, what does it feel like, this idea that you cannot see beyond? Like, so either they are able to engage in that elaboration by themselves spontaneously, or I help them a bit by, for example, describing what I'm imagining, and might say, I had the sort of imagining you at the crossroad, and you're looking at your feet and unable to look, or maybe you're looking, but you're seeing just like a desert and there's nothing. Does that feel like that to you, or something different? Always invite the client to transform it, because I don't want them to just follow my metaphor. It's not about my metaphor. It's about the process of anchoring language into more concrete features. And so what happens is that then the client might say, no, I feel more like, in fact, you often start to see some insights there because they had never thought of it. How many times did I hear that? I never thought of it actually away, but no, it me feels more like I'm facing a wall. Like maybe there is something outside, but I cannot even see anything. And then might continue and say, how close is that wall? Just right in front of you? Is it a little farther? Can you make a step? And that's a great way of using metaphors because you engage the clients. They start to get more in touch with their experience. They realize that they know more. And in fact, interestingly, in this example, as the client is describing the experience of not being able to project himself in the future, he's actually doing it because he's trying to describe what this absence of future is like, which is right now his future. And so it's really almost like re-engaged connection with oneself by using metaphors that it's, metaphors. You look at the etymology of words, all words, and you end up finding a very, very concrete definition. Over time, words get more and more abstract. They disconnected from what they originally meant. But it's really fascinating. You look and you realize that all words at the core, they were metaphors, and they get just more and more abstract. So it's just one way of remembering that language is not something that is added to our lives in an abstract way. It's an elaboration from our concrete direct experiences. Teddy bear, cup, and then it becomes more abstract.
Yeah, it sounds like metaphor is a great way to just imagine, to build those relational frames much more than just using concrete examples.
Yeah, it's interesting because metaphors, they engage also the process of building connections, of I was saying earlier, putting together things that seem to not come together, right? Like and that's actually one of the things that we often see, that people with schizophrenia, autism, I'm not overgeneralizing because there's a lot of variations, but they can struggle with that kind of abstract thinking. Like metaphors, it can be difficult because they are often taken literally. So, for example, earlier when I compared being flexible with the building resisting an earthquake, you if you struggle with understanding metaphors, you could be stuck there and say, but that's not a building, that's not an earthquake. Like that. No, but I'm not saying that it's literally that. I'm saying it's like that. I'm trying to point at the functions here. What's here, and you would be like, but I don't understand. It's not a building, right? That's right, and it can happen sometimes when we don't get the metaphor. I don't see where you're going, and so using metaphor and engaging the clients is a really good way of helping them integrate. As I've been saying all along, the core process is to integrate all perspectives. So a metaphor is a good exercise to say, hey, have you ever thought of how a building is like your belief? No, that seems weird. And then after you use the metaphor, it's like, yeah, actually. Then you'll never look at a building the same way and a belief the same way. Right. So that's what I mean really by holistic integration or functional coherence, is that you learn to put things together through a common goal.
Fantastic. The book, Mastering the Clinical Conversation, Language as Intervention. Tell us about the upcoming clinical RFT online training that you're doing.
Yeah, it's actually starting tomorrow, I think, the new one. Every 6 months about I run a round of a course on clinical RFT, which is basically a takes the participants through the chapters of the book, starting from the basics of a RFT and all the way to building a meaning, motivation, sense of self, activating change. And so it's a sort of learning this language of RFT it's not a new psychotherapy model. You don't learn a new psychotherapy model. You learn practical skills, but mostly sets of skills, ways of thinking. Therapists who come to my training, they see their universe expanding. They don't have to, just like I was saying, it's by addition, not subtraction. You don't have to stop doing things that work. You don't have to learn a new model. It's more like usually you recognize that what you're doing fits in RFT, and then you start to expand, like I did for myself. Even since writing the book, I've learned a lot of new approaches, and even outside evidence-based practices, and I teach courses on spirituality, and also it got me to be interested in a lot of interesting religious, spiritual, philosophical traditions. And then every time it's like, oh yeah, that fits in that model. That fits in that model. So that's what we learn in this course, with the video demonstrations of therapy and exercises to learn to recognize the frames and to think more in terms of framing. So yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Yeah. I appreciate you. And I'll look forward to that course. I'll post it. Is there anything else that I can post?
The link to the website of the book, if you like. That's there's a lot of resources that are free, videos, tutorials that accompany the chapters and demonstrations and things like that. So people might be interested.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right.
Spit on the ground, hold your breath, try to scare yourself to death. Bury your bones under the dirt and tear at your heart and rip your shirt and stomp your feet in disgust. Curse the gray skies if you must, but you'll find when you are done, blue skies for everyone. Break your heart and give up the race before you start. Drop your drawers and roll around. Burn your house right to the ground. Go to sleep, hit your head, screaming till your face is red, but you'll find when you are done, blue skies for everyone. Blue skies, setting sun, cherry pie